From the dawn of civilization, man has left behind his imprint. He shaped the earth into the world we know. Our society is the product of human activity, the sum total of individual efforts and a living, dynamic inheritance. Each new generation makes its own contribution and builds anew, replacing what it has torn down. It expresses its admiration of the past by creating monuments and by storing artifacts in museums. Sometimes the admiration adds something new, whether it's a mass-produced item or a new monument, and then we can speak of fertility. Vincent Van Gogh would have liked to be fertile. He would have liked an ordinary life with a wife and children. At least that is what he says in his letters. But how truthful are letters? Van Gogh died in 1890, and we know virtually nothing about him personally. His letters and his 1,700 drawings and paintings are the only account we have of his daily life. Van Gogh was a failure as an art dealer, bookseller, and minister of religion. On 2 occasions, he fell hopelessly in love, and both times was rejected. He decided to become an artist, and as his model, he used the woman he had taken into his studio, together with her daughter. He wrote, "Truthfully, I was thinking about another woman for whom my heart was beating. But she didn't want to see me, and this one happened to walk by. Sick, pregnant, hungry, and it was winter. What else could I do? I'm nearly 30 years old, and don't you think that I sometimes feel the need for love? Life should be fruitful, should it not?" This choice of companion drove away some of his personal loneliness, but the narrow-minded painters of The Hague were offended by the woman's bad reputation and expelled Van Gogh from their society. From that time onwards, he taught himself. His models came from the somber reality of everyday life, at home and on the street. He hoped he could sell his work to illustrated weeklies. After having worked as a graphic artist for 2 years, Van Gogh wrote, "I've been holding myself back a lot. I've restricted myself to drawing, and I found that I enjoy it instead of regarding it as a chore. But I feel arising in me things of color which I've never had before, things of power and breadth. Painting now enables me to achieve effects which were unattainable before. It solves so many problems for me and gives me new ways of expressing effects which make me feel very happy." Painting was to become his whole life. The relationship with the woman broke down, and he left her and her children. He moved away from the city and traveled to rural parts of the country where the population subsisted on the meager yield from peat. He tried to immerse himself in his work and to forget. He was fascinated by the landscape, but the suspicious attitude of the country people heightened his loneliness, and, reluctantly, he decided to return to his parents. Life was, however, cheaper. His father was the minister of a small village in Provence, and his lifestyle as a leading figure in the community was very different from that of his individualistic, artistic son. Despite the conflicts, Vincent stayed 2 years. He painted his parents' home, but wrote that, for him, painting was where he felt most at home.
I don't want anything other than to live in the heart of the countryside and to paint rural life. I am firmly convinced that there are some people who live in the towns who have ineradicable impressions of what life is like outside their little world. Such people are indeed struck by sincerity, but whether the public appreciates what I'm doing or not, all I know is I don't know any other way than to struggle with nature until she reveals her secrets to me.
The way of life of honest people, dependent on nature for their daily bread, appealed to him. He identified with their struggle for existence, which he wished to depict on canvas. He records in his letters how the painting came into being.
I wanted people to get the feeling that the people who are sitting around the lamp, eating the potatoes, have dug them up with their own hands. For the painting to express manual labor, and the fact that they have earned their living so honestly. I want to make people think about a way of life completely different from that of so-called polite society.
Vincent regarded himself as less than a peasant, cut off from society. His work didn't sell, and he was alone. He had no home of his own, no wife, no children, no fruitfulness in his life. He looked upon the life of a painter as a substitute. When his father died, he painted his Bible next to a small, well-thumbed volume in French entitled Joie de Vivre. He was curious to see the exponents of the new movement in painting, the Impressionists who had assembled in Paris. He had enough of the climate of his native land, and he decided to leave the village. He went to Paris, despite objections to city life, which he regarded as unnatural. It was where his brother Theo lived. Theo was an art dealer who for years had supported Vincent financially. Vincent sent him paintings in exchange for money, but Theo never managed to sell any of them. Vincent moved in with his brother and stayed with him for 2 years. Theo saw part of his home transformed into a studio, but Vincent never painted his brother's portrait. There are, however, photographs of Theo, but Vincent turned his back on photography.
Always the same conventional noses, mouths and eyes, smooth and cold. The whole thing is dead. Portraits done by a painter have their own life, which comes from the soul of the painter, something which a machine can never do.
Vincent painted self-portraits which reflect the influence his contact with contemporary painters had on his technique. He wrote that the art of photography had shown him how concrete a picture could be, but Vincent wished to portray his own impressions and record the experience of the subject. A dynamic experience, certainly when the object is oneself, looking back at one's own eyes. Paris meant a great deal to Van Gogh. As the cosmopolitan cultural climate brought him out of his shell, Vincent became more self-assured. Painters were using new techniques, and he learned much to improve his craft. He met artists who shared his feelings, and sometimes they exhibited their paintings in cafes. He felt that the restrictive, oppressive, and somber atmosphere of Holland was far behind him. However, after another unsuccessful relationship with this woman who owned the cafe, he wrote,
I feel myself losing the desire for marriage and children, and sometimes I'm so miserable feeling the way I do. Being 35 years old, I should feel quite different, and I blame it on my work. To compare people to grains of wheat, love in people is the same as the germinating of a seed. Every healthy and natural person contains a power like the power of the grain of wheat to germinate. And this is what living a natural life is all about, germinating. Do we not ourselves consist of a considerable part of grain since we live on bread? The history of the cornfields is our history, although we sometimes depict it as otherwise. Should we not surrender to growing and to being cut down when we are ripe and avoid our ordeal if we acknowledge that we are as powerless as everything that grows?
Vincent was attracted to Japanese art, which had become popular because of its exotic qualities. But he shared its admiration of nature and used Japanese prints as the basis for still life. He felt oppressed by life in the city, where man's relationship with nature had, he felt, fallen into decay. He decided to leave Paris and to go to Provence in the south of France, in the belief that he would find his own Japan in the warmth of the sun. Again, he was alone.
If I am alone, God, there's nothing I can do about it. I then have less need for company than for complete commitment to work. Isn't it the sincerity of natural feelings which propels us? And when these emotions are sometimes that strong, as they sometimes are, that you work without feeling that you are working. The strokes of the brush come in rapid succession and form a whole, as if they were words in a conversation or a letter. I'm involved in making complicated calculations, of which the hastily painted canvas, worked out in advance, is the result. Balancing the crucial colors with one another is mentally demanding, and I'm now trying to overemphasize what is important and deliberately leave what is banal as indistinct as possible.
Van Gogh slaved at his painting during the day and even at night. He regarded stars as distant suns, which suggested the existence of other planets. He dreamed of finding another life after death, when he was no longer shackled to his weak body, and therefore to his sad world. He regarded the world as a draft sketch by the Creator which had failed. But as long as men were on it, they should try to make the best of it. He did this by absorbing himself in his work to the point of neglecting his health. Painting was the only company he had, and without it, he felt completely alone. Amitié, friendship. His last chance of filling his lonely existence was to set up a studio for painters in which he could live and work in the company of other artists. He made his yellow house available for this purpose. Knowing that Gauguin was having financial problems, Vincent wrote him the following letter.
If I could find another painter who would like to express the south of France, and who could, like me, be sufficiently absorbed in his work to live the life of a monk, visiting a bottle just once, every 2 weeks, but for the rest be occupied by his work and the limited inclination to waste his time, then this could be an ideal arrangement. Here, by myself, isolation taunts me a little.
Gauguin duly arrived and painted a portrait of Van Gogh, but with a facial expression which shocked the sitter. Vincent did a painting of the two artists' empty chairs. On Gauguin's chair are a candle and a couple of books, and on his own, his consoling pipe. They were two very different people. All they had in common was their own stubbornness, and they couldn't get along. Things came to a head after a succession of rows, and they finally parted their ways. It was then that Van Gogh broke down. His overtaxed nervous system collapsed as his last hope disappeared. He turned the razor with which he'd threatened Gauguin on himself and cut off his earlobe. Perhaps this was an attempt to convert into physical pain the unbearable spiritual torment which he now experienced. We don't know what his motive was, nor can we speak with any certainty about the repeated attacks which returned at intervals of 2 to 3 months. At such times, he suffered from hallucinations, which, as he himself said, were both terrifying and religious. There was a move to have him committed to an asylum, but Van Gogh decided to enter a mental institution voluntarily. His isolation was complete.
It seems to me that the best comfort, if not the only remedy, lies still in deep friendships, even when they have the disadvantage of anchoring us more firmly in the world than is desirable in days of great pain. I once observed a sower who fought like a man possessed to finish his work in the full heat of the day. I saw in him the picture of death, in the sense that man is like the wheat which is cut down, but of death without sorrow. It fulfills itself in the bright rays of the sun which bathe everything in a subtle golden light. How funny that I should have seen this through the bars of a cell in an institution. Life passes by, time past never returns. But I am working ferociously because I realize that the opportunity to work will never return, particularly in my case, where a worse attack could destroy my ability to paint forever.
Van Gogh's life, hitherto less than successful, was now wretched. He again sought consolation in painting. The fragile blossoms, however, had vanished, and in their place came gnarled old olive trees. Nature had become grim and twisted. Life had passed it by. When he was not allowed out of the institution because of the attacks, he used engravings in periodicals and based his own paintings on the work of the old masters he admired. And he interpreted their work in his own colors. also incorporated his own past in his work, and memories of the North came out in a winter landscape. He felt completely defeated, and he dreamt of returning to the North again. He wanted to go back and complete his impressions of Provence in work dominated by lonely, almost black cypress trees. However, the return had a double significance. Breaking his journey at the home of his brother Theo, he was confronted with everything he'd ever painted. Theo had Vincent's best works on display in his own home, and things for which he had no room were stored in a damp back room. Vincent's work was unsaleable. Nobody wanted it. But Theo had a collection of over 700 paintings. An art-loving doctor had been found who was ready to keep an eye on him, and so Vincent was allowed to leave the confines of the clinic. He rented the attic of the inn at Auvers-sur-Oise, 50 kilometers north of Paris. But although things changed, they didn't improve. His brother Theo, who was still supporting him financially, was now responsible for a family and was at the point of getting out of the art trade. It was said that he'd bought too much unmarketable work by impressionist painters. His health, too, was deteriorating. Vincent felt desolate, excluded. As a human being, he'd long come to terms with his loneliness. His last hope of becoming a recognized painter in society was gone.
I feel that I have failed, and am reconciled to failure. That is the fate I have accepted, which nothing will change. The future looks bleak, and I see no prospects of happiness.
Once more, he sought consolation in nature. The old qualities remained, but there was no solace.
I simply thought that these canvases will be able to say to you what I cannot express in words about the powerful and stimulating qualities of farmlands, the endless cornfields under turbulent skies. But I also try to express their sadness and overpowering loneliness.
The year before, Vincent had written to his sister,
"It is highly likely that much sorrow awaits me, and that is something I can very well do without, I assure you. I am in no way attracted to the life of a martyr. I have always striven for something other than the quality of heroism, which I do not possess, that I do admire in others, but which I do not see as my duty or my ideal."
On the 27th of July, 1890, Vincent shot himself in the stomach and died 2 days later. There are few clues as to why he committed the suicide. He once wrote,
"I have always thought that when an artist shows his work to other people, he reserves the right to keep his internal torment to himself. The work of an artist and his private life are like a mother who has just given birth. We may look at the baby, but not lift up her nightdress to see if there are any bloodstains." Well, the only thing we can do is to allow our paintings to speak for themselves.
This is one of the very last he painted.